This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright everybody, before we begin today's Critical Thought, just a brief announcement. If you missed the Game Wisdom Live, either recording or live talk last night, then you may not have heard that I have completely revamped the Patreon campaign for Game Wisdom, the streams, and of course this YouTube channel. I'm focusing on smaller goals that for every $100 increment we hit, it will add a new kind of content to the site, and more importantly, it will allow patrons to actually vote on what they would like to see for the following month. So if you haven't had a chance yet, be sure to check out patreon.com/gwbycer. You'll be able to see our new goals. Right now there are two currently available, the $100 and $200 tier. The $100 tier is opening up access to more classic and expanded Sony related content, including playing more classic games from the PS1, 2, 3, and 4 era thanks to the PlayStation Now service and their backlog on PSN. I've also added in a Let's Break of Ninja Gaiden Sigma to that goal as well. So if you would like to see that happen and see more content come to the channel in the future, be sure to head over to patreon.com/gwbycer and donate. I've also changed around the rewards as well. So there are some new ones, and some of the cheaper ones have been altered. Also allowing for people to vote for a minimum of $5 a month for future Let's Plays that we earn through the goals. But otherwise, I will be posting a little bit more about that and mentioning it on Twitter and such, and you'll of course get the tag at the end of our videos here. But I won't be, bugging you guys about a start like this too often, unless there's some big news or stuff like that. But let's get to today's Critical Thought, and we got a good one. We're talking about accessibility when it comes to video games. And I know when you think about that, your mind will probably go to easier topics, such as colorblind mode, subtitles for people who are deaf, stuff like that. But there is actually a greater talk about this, and it has to do with how technology has evolved and developers are trying to push things in interesting directions. And my friends, I got a very unique prop for you for today because I'm very certain no one else has this in the entire world. And it's going to take some finagling to show you this, but let's see if we can do this. Don't worry, it will make sense in a minute. I hope. This, if I cover it up just right, you can see I have a scar running from about here all the way down on my right foot. I also have two scars under my kneecap from surgeries I had when I was 10 and 11. I had to have my right leg essentially reconstructed from about, I think it was like 70% or 75% reconstructed due to birth defects. And what does that mean? Well, it means that I had to deal with pain a lot. My foot itself is actually numb. I'm not sure if I can stretch this out, but basically I have numbness all throughout the sole of my foot, and it also makes it very hard to drive. And obviously walking around can be a bit of a hazard as well. But what does that mean for accessibility? Well, I can tell you right away that it has limited me in terms of driving normal cars. I can't keep my right foot on a pedal for too long without having intense pain. I don't have complete control over my foot as well due to hypersensitivity and numbness. And it makes it a lot harder to do anything pedal related. And bringing this back to talking about accessibility, there's also limits some of the games that I can play. I really can't play any racing or a car simulator that makes use of pedals, or in fact any game that uses a pedal interface for the right foot. For instance, when I was trying to play Rock Band a few years ago, I was attempting to see if I could strengthen my right foot by using the drum pedals, of course. And I could only play for about 5 to 10 minutes before intense pain started flaring up in my foot, and it felt like my entire leg was going to explode there. But what this means is that there are some genres that I literally cannot play due to my condition here. And when we talk about accessibility in the greater sense, this goes back to people who suffer from issues like deafness, colorblind, and even arthritis, but we'll be coming back to that in a few minutes. When it comes to making games built around people who suffer from disabilities, there's a really good post, and I think a offshoot from the IGDA site, talking about all the different disabilities that someone can have and how it relates to game development and quality of life issues. If I can find that website, I'm pretty sure I bookmarked it a few years ago. I'll try to link it in the notes below. But when it comes to designing your game, this is one of those topics that, quite frankly, unless you are one of those people who suffer from a disability, it's not something on your to-do list. And it's kind of hard to think about these things when we talk about the differences between AAA and indie development. In the perfect world, it would be easy. Every game would have subtitles, colorblind mode, functionality for different controllers, and stuff like that. But as we all know, especially for those of you who have made games in the indie space, every new feature is going to cost you time and money. And in some cases, it can be time and money that you just don't have. And for any indie developers out there, whether you suffer from any disabilities or not, how have you managed to, if you have, incorporate these kinds of options into your games? And more importantly, how easy or hard was it for you? Because again, this isn't a topic that we talk about too often. With a lot of AAA titles, we have seen them take steps to make their games as accessible as possible. Again, the aforementioned colorblind mode, subtitles, and the like. But the other point for today's critical thought, and was more interesting to talk about, is when accessibility is threatened simply by the design of your game itself. And that is a little bit harder to talk about, because there aren't too many examples in the grand scheme of things, but I've certainly had to deal with a few myself. When I'm talking about games that basically suffer from inaccessibility by their design, we're referring to either mechanics or systems in the game that can either punish or hinder someone with certain disabilities. And a few of these you should be able to figure out just by what we've talked about so far. But here are a few good examples. Let's say we have games with puzzles built around sounds, distinguishing different sounds from one another. If someone's deaf, that's a puzzle they literally can't do. Just as if we had a puzzle to recognize different colors and someone is suffering from color blindness. But we can even dig a little bit deeper than that. Games, as you know, one of the more popular features, especially over the last decade, was the greater introduction for QTEs, or sections where the player has to rapidly jam on a button constantly or move a control stick violently back and forth to survive. For people with repetitive stress injury, wow, I can't talk. Repetitive stress injuries, there we go, third time's the charm, or arthritis. These kinds of situations can cause them a lot of pain to the point that they may not even be able to do it to begin with. As another example, and this is one that I've heard a lot about, but I've fortunately not been able to suffer from it, is getting like that kind of seasickness from playing first-person shooters, or I'm sorry, motion sickness. This is one thing I've heard from a lot of people, and surprisingly, especially when I talked about playing the original Game Boy and getting migraines, I've never suffered from motion sickness playing first-person shooters. But this has been something that has been documented and has hurt a lot of people. Due to the rapid swinging of the cameras and that motion, it kind of brings about a similar reaction that someone would get if they're on a boat and they suffer from seasickness. And again, it's not something that I suffer from directly, so I don't have any first-hand knowledge. But when it comes to designing your games, the important lesson for today is when you're coming up with either unique or interesting mechanics, try to think about how someone will be able to do this. As we've talked about multiple times before, it's very dangerous to design your game in an echo chamber. You may think that having a control scheme that requires you to hold the controller backwards and twist your hand like this to play with may be interesting and exciting. But for the vast majority of people, they're going to be going, what the hell am I doing? Why am I holding the controller like this? But the last point for today, and this is the one that I want to talk about, is accessibility when it comes to, I guess, lifestyle would be the appropriate term. And what we've seen as developers have been experimenting with new control schemes and technologies over the last decade, that sometimes the systems or even flat peripherals can be made that don't necessarily work with everybody. For instance, if, like I mentioned a few minutes ago with pedals and myself with my foot, if your game's going to require the use of a pedal controller or a pedal kind of system for using your right foot, I can't play it. Doesn't matter what the game is, doesn't matter what the design is. Other cases, here's actually another goal now I've actually had to deal with. Legend of Zelda, the Spirit Tracks. Oh, 1 second, I will have to edit this out. We'll be right back. And we're back. Sorry about that, I had to take a phone call. The example I was going to bring up was Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks. This was for the Nintendo DS. In the game, you had to make use of the DS's microphone functionality in order to basically play, I think it was this ocarina, so you would blow into it for each note. The problem for me is, besides that lovely scar on my foot, I also suffer from massive allergies, which, if you've watched previous Critical Thoughts, or listened to me choke a few times, you know that is the case. So I was basically choking myself trying to play the ocarina. And without having a secondary feature for it, I literally couldn't play it. And I actually had to stop playing the game before even the first dungeon because of that problem. And again, this is the greater issue with accessibility. Whenever you have unique or esoteric systems, you always run the risk of alienating someone. And whenever we have to do stuff that requires player input like that, it can cause trouble. How about if there's games that require you to sing or, breathe very violently into a microphone? For people who suffer from allergies or asthma, that could be a big problem for them. I'll give you another example. I also have problem as another bit. This seems to be like the Josh's confessional critical thought. I have problems with fine drawing. So when they do stuff like incidentally, another Legend of Zelda game, I think it was Wind Waker, that you have to draw these shapes very perfectly using the mouse, or I'm sorry, using the no wait, I'm blanking out. Not Wind Waker. It was the DS sequel to Wind Waker, whose name escapes me right now. Wow, Nintendo really hurt me with their Zelda games. But the 3DS or the DS Zelda game, they required you to draw shapes onto a seed chart or onto a door to open them. And the problem was my hand kept shaking as I was drawing the shapes, and the game wasn't recognizing my drawings. And because of that, I literally couldn't progress. I actually had to have a family member who has a much greater control over their hands to draw the shape themselves and get me through it. But if I didn't have someone here to help me, again, this would be a game that I would literally come to a wall that I would not be able to get around. And the point is, whenever you're trying to design these things, if you're going to do something like that requires a very specific input or some kind of unique requirement on the player, try to think of a secondary option. Maybe if the player just literally can't do it, switch to a different form of controls. For instance, with the ocarina from Spirit Tracks, how about if I could just push a button and let it play the note? And this is one of the risks you have to run whenever you're using proprietary technologies or unique mechanics and hardware. And that takes me to one final point that I was thinking about before today's critical thought. Now, please keep in mind, this is just hearsay at the moment, but I was reading an interview when they were talking about the Nintendo Switch and what they were planning on doing for multiplayer functionality, and Reggie was saying that they're planning on integrating this all into a smartphone app. So you would have voice chat, multiplayer matchmaking, lobbies, and the like, but outside of the Nintendo Switch. And here's the big point about that. For people who don't own a smartphone, they're basically screwing themselves out of multiplayer functionality. Like I said, please keep in mind that is just hearsay at this moment. So until Nintendo will come out and confirm yes or no, we still don't know the complete truth. But this is one of those issues that we've been also hearing about with internet access. As we've seen over the last decade, developers have been pushing for greater functionality in terms of internet, be it multiplayer games, downloadable content, and even day one patches. And what this means is that they are expecting everyone to have internet functionality. And there are a few big red flags here. First is there are still parts of the United States, and I'm sure parts of the world, where internet access is not an automatic given. For some areas, when I was doing my Comcast job about 6 years ago, I remember talking to people who lived in apartments or multi-story buildings who, due to just the arrangements or how the building was designed, they could not get internet access. And what that means is if your game requires it for single-player content, they're kind of SOL. This also goes back to that greater discussion about day one patching. If you're requiring your game to have a day one patch for a single-player title, and someone buys who doesn't have it, again, how are they going to play your game? And like I said, with this kind of discussions, you really need to be careful whenever you go outside the box like this. This is why it's important to have a standard in terms of what hardware you're expecting people to have. For instance, if I buy a Nintendo Wii U, I know I'm going to have the tablet controller, the base, the little stylus, stuff like that. If I have a computer, it means I have a keyboard and mouse. And this is what led to that very importance of standardization over the last decade, which I know we dedicate a critical thought to. By having a understanding of what everyone at the most basic level will have, it frees you up to design everything around those constraints. If you're going to, whenever you try to add in a secondary peripheral or an accessory, that will always limit your game, because you can never assume that everyone is going to have a gamepad available for their computer. Of course, you can let people know that right up front, and that's a very important point. If your game's going to require a secondary peripheral that doesn't come standard with the hardware, you must let them know. Because nothing will piss people off more knowing that they just spend $50, $60, $70 on a game to realize, oh, I need to spend $30, $40 on something else just to play this game. And again, we can certainly expand on things as well. But for those of you watching, here's a question. I have two questions for you. The first one, for those of you who have unfortunately suffered from any kind of disabilities, have you ran into any games that you try to play that you just literally couldn't get working because of it? And have you ran into any examples of games that have managed to accommodate your disability and did it really well? And then the second question is, for developers watching this, what do you think about these kinds of unique mechanics? Again, when you think outside the box with either different peripherals, unique control schemes, stuff like that, are you more inclined to use them, or do you want to try and make your games as accessible as possible, even if it hurts, I guess, the flow or the universe that you're trying to create? But that's going to do it for today's Critical Thought. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy things, be sure to like and subscribe and all that. And like I said at the start, be sure to check out the new Patreon campaign with updated goals and rewards if you'd like to support Game Wisdom, unlock more content, and even have a say for future content here on the channel, site, and stream. Once again, I'm Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Have a great rest of the night, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.